Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is ice. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we can use this verb. The first way you might hear the verb ice used is to mean to coat with ice, to cover with ice, or to change into ice. You might hear this used in connection to the weather. A second way to use the verb ice is to mean to decorate a dessert with icing. Icing might be a new word for you, and we will talk about it more when we look at related words later in the video. But for now, just know that it is a sugary topping for a dessert. A third way to use the verb ice connects to the sport of hockey. If you aren't familiar with hockey, ignore this third definition, but if you like the sport, then you might recognize that ice can mean to shoot an ice hockey puck the length of the rink and beyond the other team or opponent's goal line. A fourth way that you might hear the verb ice used is in a slang way to mean to kill. Now, I don't think this is something you're going to hear very often, but you might hear it in television or movies, particularly if they're kind of action-oriented. You should know that ice is a regular verb. To make the progressive, we're going to drop the E and then add ing to form icing. The past tense and participle forms of this verb will be made by adding just the letter D. We're not adding an ed here because this verb already ends with an E. If you listen to this base verb, ice, hopefully you hear that S sound at the end of the word. That tells us our past tense ending is going to make a T sound. Iced, iced. Now let's take a look at some phrasal verbs. The first one that you might hear is to ice someone out. And what this means is one person is treating another person with a lack of affection or warmth. They might be ignoring the person, maybe not speaking to them, and there many times doesn't seem like there's an explanation for it. So that's our example sentence. I'm not sure why he's icing me out. The second phrasal verb we'll look at is ice over. And what you might see from my chart here really quickly is that it's going to have essentially the same meaning as ice up. So both ice over and ice up mean to become covered with ice. Let's look at some example sentences with both. Our pond iced over before the holidays. So we're talking about a body of water. Might see ice over connected to lakes, ponds, etc. Another example would be careful. The stairs have iced up overnight, so they've become covered in ice. If you said the stairs have iced over, I think people would understand what you were saying and what you meant by it. Now let's continue practicing using our verb ice in a few different verb tenses. Today, we'll take a look at the past progressive, the present perfect, and the simple future. Let's start with the past progressive. We use this verb tense to talk about an action that was ongoing in the past when it was interrupted by another event or action. That other action will be in the simple past tense, and the progressive is what's signaling that it was ongoing. So, to make the past progressive, we need a past form of be, so that will be was or were, depending on our subject, and then that ing form of the verb. Here's an example sentence. She was icing a cake when the cat jumped on the counter. Right? So the action of icing or putting this sugary topping on a cake was ongoing when it was interrupted by the cat having jumped up on the counter. If I want to make a negative past progressive sentence, all I need to do is insert not after was or were. You might hear native speakers use the contraction forms wasn't or weren't. Here's another example. The roads weren't icing over when I drove home. So that action was not in progress. Finally, if I want to make a yes or no question in the past progressive, I'm going to start with the past form of be, was or were, then I'll have my subject, and then the ing form of the verb. Was she icing them out? Now let's take a look at the present perfect. We use this verb tense to talk about an action that started in the past and continues into the present, or an action that occurred at some point in the past, but we don't really know when, and it might not be important. To make the present perfect, we need to use either have or has, depending on our subject, and then the participle form of the verb. Let's look at the affirmative example. His windshield has iced over, so it's become covered in ice. If I instead want to make a negative present perfect sentence, I need to insert not after have or has. You might hear native speakers use the contractions hasn't or haven't. Here's an example. The athletes haven't iced their knees since the last practice. And this usage is going to tie back to our first definition with that idea of covering something in ice. And they might be doing this to reduce swelling if perhaps they've injured their knees. Finally, let's make a yes or no question in the present perfect. To do this, we're going to start with have or has, then we'll have our subject, and then the participle form of the verb. Has the lake iced over yet? Now let's look at simple future. Today, we're going to use be, going, to, and the base verb to make simple future sentences. The only thing that's maybe a bit tricky about this form of the simple future is our form of be will change based on our subject. So if our subject is I, we'll use am. If our subject is he, she, or it, we'll use is. And if our subject is you, we, or they, we'll use are. Let's take a look at an example. All that rain is going to ice up the roads quickly. This might happen because the temperatures are falling or the temperatures are dropping. Now, if I want to make a negative simple future sentence using be going to, I'm going to insert not after my be verb. Here's another example. I'm not going to ice you out if you disagree with me. So I'm not going to treat you worse or without affection or warmth. Finally, if I want to make a yes or no question in the simple future, I'm going to start with a form of be. So again, am, is, are, or are. Then I'll have my subject, then going to, and the base verb. Are you going to ice the cookies later? Now, let's take a look at some words that are related to our verb ice. And the first word we're going to look at is just the noun form. So same spelling, same pronunciation. This noun can have a couple different meanings. We're just going to focus on one today that I think is the most common. Frozen water. That is generally transparent, means you can see through it, and solid. Those are the important words to know with this definition. So here's an example of this noun usage in a sentence. Were the pipes blocked with ice? So again, think of frozen water. Connected to this is the noun ice cube. This is a small block of ice that's generally made in a freezer, and it's most commonly done to be able to add to drinks later on. Here's an example. I'm going to fill the ice cube trays. Many people will put water in them, then put them into their freezer, and after a few hours, you have ice cubes. The next word is icicle. This is a noun. It is a hanging piece of ice that tapers. So it's kind of thick at the top, and then it gets smaller. That's what tapering means. So a hanging, tapering piece of ice that is formed by freezing and dripping water. I have included a picture over here, so you have an idea. You might see these things hang from your house in the winter, and that's my example sentence. There are some large icicles hanging off the gutters. The last word we're going to look at today was what I mentioned earlier in the video. We're going to look at icy. This can have a couple different meanings, but the most common one you'll likely to encounter is this mixture of sugar with some type of liquid or butter, and it's used again as sort of a coating or topping for desserts. Here is an example. What's your favorite flavor of icing? So we can combine other things to give it different tastes. And again, I've got another little picture down here, so it hopefully helps you picture what icing is. We've got some examples of like purple icing and then green, yellow, and purple. There are some examples of white icing as well. Thanks so much